the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing, from hearing the present matter. Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Okay. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, and then there'll be questions from us to Brian. Then we will open the hearing to the public for testimony. Applicant will have not more than 15 minutes. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral folks, not more than 5 minutes each. And then rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. At that time, we'll close the public testimony, and then we will have questions and discussion and deliberation, and no additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure outlined for this hearing? Okay. Brian.
Okay, let's get started. The first public hearing that we have tonight involves a conditional use permit for a detached accessory dwelling to be built in the rear yard at 1355 North Oak Street. And looking at the screen there in front of you, it's this lot that's in dark green. The entire area is low density R1 zoning, and you have an existing home on this site, and it's in a neighborhood all developed out with homes all around it, except for the south where they abut Maple Street Park. This is a plot plan of that lot showing the existing house at this location here and a driveway coming off of North Oak Street. And so really north is a little bit more the direction of the street here. And the park is right down in here. And then in the rear yard, separated by more than 10 feet from the existing house and following the normal setbacks of 7 feet along the interior side property and 15 feet at the rear of the property, we have a proposed accessory dwelling unit with a front porch located right here. This is the layout inside of that accessory dwelling unit that can't exceed 800 square feet in size. They say down here it's 625 square feet in size, so it certainly meets that criteria. Here's your porch and a front door, and you can see a nice layout in here with the living room and kitchen, and over this way, and a laundry facility I think is in here too, and a bedroom and bath. So it's a nice facility. Their intent is to extend utilities to it from the home itself as much as possible. And its intended purpose for now is to house a family member, but it's worthwhile for them to know and for you as decision makers that when you approve these detached accessory dwellings, that they are available at some point in the future for this property owner or someone else that might subsequently buy the property to rent this out as a separate dwelling unit. And it makes logical sense for them to keep that in mind for flexibility. We always tell people if they're going to go through this process, you might as well set up so that you have that flexibility, or someone that buys the property down the road, because it does run with the land. when we approve the conditional use, it runs with the land until something would otherwise change that. In staff's review of this, it was a pretty straightforward application. We concluded that there was, it's a quarter acre size lot. It seemed to have adequate room to maintain the normal spacing that you would see from your neighboring properties. So light and air has been maintained even by building an accessory dwelling in the rear yard because of the size. They have to remove a shrub and maybe one tree, I think is what I read in their application, but they intend to plant some vegetation after the structure is done. We only had one, that's included in your packet, comment in writing from citizens nearby, and they were very supportive of the proposed use and didn't have any concerns about it. We didn't ask for any traffic study. We're talking about the need for one additional parking space. They've indicated that they can handle that in a paved, it's already paved, my understanding, in the front driveway. There's a motor home that can normally park in a covered area, and that leaves 3 requirement for their existing home and the one additional one for this facility that's in the back. We indicated in the staff report that if you were thinking of a non-family rental unit, it would probably be nice if there was a sidewalk that would come around to the driveway so they would have a nice way to get back to it. In this particular case, since it's a family member, there's no need for that at this point in time. They can simply go to the back door and be a part of the family. Trying to think, I think that was really the only issue that had come up. The additional utilities that would be needed, just like traffic, it's perfectly capable of all the utilities are currently capable of handling an additional small dwelling unit on the property. And we really don't see any adverse impacts in this particular location for them to build this proposed accessory dwelling unit. As you know, the criteria does require it to match the appearance of the existing home. Therefore, you know, kind of helping it continue to blend in with the neighborhood since they're used to what the existing home is. So we did recommend approval without benefit of this public hearing, and did put a condition that they comply with any utility extension requirements by our Public Works Department and Canby Utility, and the third parking space that would be paved as we discussed, and that we'll assign a new address for this property. It's a request by the fire department that we do that. Are there any questions?
Okay. Any questions?
No.
Okay. Can we have any proponents? That would be correct. You can come up here and just speak into the microphone, state your name and street address, please.
Arlene Fuentes, 1355 North Oak Street, Canby. And we've applied for this conditional use permit to build this small home for my mother. She's 82. And we want to provide this and hope that we can provide it so that she can remain as independent as possible with us right there to take care of her. She's a very independent and busy woman, but she needs family nearby. And we're it. So we're hoping that this happens for her. We've lived in this house for 31 years. Been very happy there, and so it's the base for our family, extended family. So.
Okay. Anything else? No. Any questions? I actually did have a question. Later on, my only concern would be at some point, if you make that a rental down the road, that there is no driveway access. I know you have a place for them to park, but there's no driveway. That's just the concern that I would have if I were sitting in your chair.
Oh, you mean directly to the back of the house?
Yeah,
A driveway? No, there isn't. We have a big patio back there and grass, and we are going to provide her walkways to our home, into the house and to the yard from the house, but no.
Any other questions? Thank you. Do we have any opponents? Anybody that's neutral that would like to speak on this matter? In that case, there's no need for rebuttal. There you go. At this time, we'll entertain a motion to approve CUP 17-03 for Fuentes. Is that how, did I pronounce that correctly? Fuentes? Okay.
I move that we approve CUP-17-03 with the conditions that the staff mentioned.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Then we'll move on to this. Whoever put this together, I want to thank them so much for providing such great reading material. I suffer from insomnia, so that solved that problem. So now we're going to consider a site and design review conditional use permit to construct an essential public communication service facility consisting of a 150-foot self-supporting lattice tower with multi-omnidirectional antennas and microwave dishes at 202 North Walnut Street. That's DR 17-04/CUP 1701 Clackamas 800 Radio Group. And I'm going to go through, I have to read this again, so bear with us. So the matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time. State your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each, the opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for a rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it's only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from hearing the present matter. Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Okay. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First of all, Brian will give us a staff report, followed by questions. Then the applicant will have no more than 15 minutes. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral folks, not more than 5 minutes each. Rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. And at that time, we will close the public testimony. And then there will be questions, some more questions. Then discussion and deliberation by the Planning Commission. No additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure outlined for this hearing? Okay. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Got an aerial here that is showing the property out in our industrial park outlined in blue here. This is the 23.66 acre tax lot that it's located on. They started their search on this property with locating over in the corner here next to Malino Road. And fairly early on in the process, where do I think they discovered that the only way to get electrical service, which is the only utility service that they need, is to come across the entire south boundary of the property from Walnut Street. So this, an easement would have encumbered the entire south edge of this property, and the property owner was not amenable to that. And they started at that location, partly at a, I think it was a little bit higher over in that location, and staff had indicated that when they first approached us that the further out on the edge of town, the better, is what we were thinking. In fact, we started saying, have you looked in the county rather than in the city for this? And the adjacent property is, I think it's EFU county zoning. And the way the county's zoning ordinance works, they would have no opportunity for approval of a cell tower in that zone unless they totally and absolutely exhausted any other possibilities, which means going through whatever process the city might have for a location in the city before they would even consider a possible use permit or conditional use permit in that zone out in the county. So I thought you might want to be aware of that, because staff was certainly asking that at the very beginning, why not put it out in the rural area rather than in our industrial park. Other than that, they are, and they've supplied tons of information indicating why they need a tower, a cell tower for the Clackamas emergency services facility in this particular area of town, indicating the other facilities, one existing and one new, that it needs to communicate with to provide this seamless type service for all of our safety, emergency safety providers. And so one of the unique aspects, I'm sure by reading the application, that this is not a typical private cell tower. It is a public entity that is specifically communicating with our emergency services providers in those situations where an emergency is at hand, and communication is really important. And so in their submittal, they've indicated, and with lots of supporting information and data, the first question that staff pressed is why a lattice tower rather than a monopole tower? And so if you've seen that data and the exhibits that we feel like they've adequately explained the safety aspects, the fact that a lattice tower allows the wind to blow through it, it's more stable, it doesn't waver and shake in the wind, and they're having microwave dishes on it, and that's a very important aspect to maintain that emergency communication without, during high winds, breaking that communication off, which might not be so big of a thing if you were just talking to your mom on your cell phone, but when you're in an emergency situation, is particularly critical to them. And so I thought there was good information related to that in the packet as well. The zoning criteria you'll see in the talks about the process that they need to go through to get approval. And as you can see, we have a site and design review along with a conditional use permit. And the conditional use permit is due to the height of the tower and the fact that it's a lattice instead of a monopole. Our ordinance is set up in a manner that if you locate in a preferred zone, which this is, an M1 industrial zone or an M2 industrial zone, and you're less than 150 feet in height, and you're doing a monopole, all they'd need to be doing is getting a building permit. They wouldn't need to be here in front of the Planning Commission. But they're 150 feet with the tower and 167 feet with one of the tallest antennas on top of it. And so that requires the conditional use permit and the fact that it's a lattice tower instead of a monopole. Our ordinance is kind of difficult to figure out at times, and so it took us a while to work with the applicant to make sure we knew what was needed. And they had actually started with a 180-foot tall tower, and there wasn't any question at that point. Some other confusion came in, and I've mentioned that in the staff report, and certainly can't blame the applicant for bringing it to my attention, is that because this is a public facility, we have a definition within our code that calls, that fits this proposal and calls it a minor public facility. And it says a minor public facility is an outright permitted use within this zone. But we have another section of the ordinance, which I've pointed out, in the cell tower, the wireless telecommunications ordinance, that it also very specifically fits because of its height and its use of a lattice tower, and says, hey, it needs a conditional use permit. So I indicated to the applicant that in this case where we've got, it fits either, that the more restrictive aspect is why they're here in front of you today. With their very thick submittal, tried to demonstrate how they comply with the more restrictive requirements in our code, which requires this conditional use permit, and following those criteria and going through our site and design review process. In the process of going through the site and design review process, if you remember doing some of our other commercial developments, we have our point matrix that is intended to assure quality development, and you get a certain number of points for various aspects. It doesn't tell you exactly what you have to meet, but you have to come up with a minimum number of those development standards. Well, we discovered, staff working with the developer right off the beginning, that trying to make those matrices apply in any reasonable fashion to a cell tower doesn't work well. Those matrices were designed for a new building, a commercial building like some that you've been seeing, AutoZone and some others that are along the highway and such. I commend them for doing a reasonable job in trying to make the matrix fit those aspects that seem somewhat relevant, and saying others were not applicable. And in doing so, they did a fairly good job of trying to apply the matrix. Unfortunately, they really did the wrong matrix, because the first thing in our code says you do the industrial overlay matrix in place of the normal one. So I looked at it and was about ready to call the applicant to tell him that they hadn't completed the right matrix. And when I looked at it, it was absolutely impossible to apply that matrix to a cell tower. So I said, what the heck? I think they've done their best they can, and that these matrices aren't applicable. So I don't know whether you caught that reviewing the staff report or not, but staff made the findings that basically the matrix point systems aren't really applicable. And if you do want to say they're applicable, they did a decent job with the one that is more reasonable if you're trying to make it apply. But technically, it's not the one that applies in this case. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I thought I'd mention that aspect to you. This is a site plan that they've indicates their compound area, and it's 2,500 square feet, and it's surrounded by a 5-foot buffer that has these arborvitae screenings. And the outside edge also has a chain link fence with slatted screening slats within it as well. And then they do have 2 or 3 strands of barbed wire on the top of it. And in this particular case, that's not a problem in the industrial park as long as it's not along a sidewalk. And so our city ordinance, it's not in our development code, but our city ordinance does allow the use of barbed wire in an instance like this for security purposes. Inside the compound, they have a building that's prefab right here. I believe they said it was a concrete building that's prefab. And they have a generator on site, and indicated that the electricity is the only utility service that they need. Then when I was reviewing the landscape plan, I said, our ordinance does require an irrigation system for all landscaping. And so I said, I wonder if they need water service also to keep their landscaping alive. And so that's something that you might want to ask the applicants about. So we've tried to make, I think, address that with a condition of approval, that they need to figure out a way to haul water in for the first couple of years of establishment of the landscaping. And after that, I think it will do just fine without an irrigation system, as the type of materials that they're using for screening is all they really have on the site. The other aspect of the site, besides the tower itself, of course, is they have a driveway coming in off of Walnut Street, and they have a 20-foot paved apron that's required by ordinance, so no gravel is strewn onto the streets. And then after that, we felt it was appropriate to allow them to use a gravel surface in the fact that that actually decreases stormwater runoff when they can do that. And with only one car, typically a maintenance technician showing up once or twice a month, I don't think we're going to have too much trouble with dust and that kind of thing from traffic by using a little bit of gravel. And this is out in the middle of a field, basically, an agricultural field currently until we get some large industry that wants to go into this site. My understanding is they'll be doing a 10-year lease with 4 or 5-year renewals or something like that, so this could certainly be here for quite some time. What part of their requirements by ordinance, and they've done a really good job, is showing us what this lattice tower will look like on the site. And so you see right here on the screen, they've got the existing view, and then they show a proposed view, and here you can see the lattice tower and how it might work from a vantage point out there. And they've given us 3 of those. Here's another existing view. And you can see it just behind one of these pine trees. I think there's one more from another view. Again, you can see it in front of the trees here. Gives you some idea what it might look like. And there is another existing lattice tower that's south, block or 2 in the industrial park, and that was one of their early reviews to look at if they could co-locate on an existing tower. And I think if you've looked at that, it was very clear to them that it wasn't built to the stability they needed. It wasn't tall enough. It didn't have the capacity, extra space to hold all of the components that they needed. And so it was pretty obvious right away that it wasn't going to meet their needs. And they have lots of other documentation, attached exhibits, indicating the efforts that they went through looking at all other facilities within the surrounding area, and indicating that in a fairly close proximity to this site, at a fairly high altitude, in order to reach signals down towards the Willamette River, where there's a lot of boating and those kind of things, that they have had to respond to emergency situations in the past. So through our review of this, I don't do this very often, but I did want to commend Skip Green for one of the best application submittals we've had for quite some time. It made our job a whole lot easier. He was very open and clear about all the review criteria, and it really did. It was a pleasure working with you. The conditions of approval are listed in the end of the staff report, and most of them are kind of standard here. It only applies to the submittal that we've got, and anything else would have to go through a modification in accordance with the code, and they do have to comply with any utility standards by Canby Utility, since that's the utility they're using. There was a discussion that they didn't need FCC approval. So we've made a condition because there's one section of the rules that talks about proving that the site has no wetlands, no historic Indian burial sites, and a couple other things. So we want them to demonstrate to us why they don't need to comply with that, or et cetera, because that wasn't part of their application. To our knowledge, it's not in a floodplain, and it has none of those attributes. But I'd like them to tell us that it doesn't have those attributes as well, or why they don't need to do that. We felt like the landscaping was fine, so the only condition we have is how are they going to keep it alive without an irrigation system? And they only have one, condition 6 deals with lighting. They have a mounted light on their prefab building that shines into the compound. And so I'm not too worried about it. There's no nearby houses, empty field. There's, excuse me, there's one house to the south. But our code says that light shouldn't trespass off the site. And we didn't have enough information to prove that that was going to be the case. So they should be able to provide that with their construction plans. And let's see if there's anything else here. We just made sure that their driveway with a condition will meet the Public Works design standards where it meets the street with the paving. And they will submit their site plan to us as they're doing their building permit with the county for this tower and the structure at the base. And they'll go through our final construction plan review process. And I think that's it. So with those conditions in mind, we did find that it does meet our code requirements, and that with the conditions that we've placed for approval, that will make sure that it does. And any questions about this use?
Can you tell me why the, I didn't understand why it was scaled back from 180 feet down to 150? Could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, the applicant can probably answer better, but the FFA, or do I get that right? The Federal Aviation Administration, we're fine with the 180-foot tall tower, but then the Oregon Aeronautical Administration more specifically looked at the Dietz Air Park, which is located nearby, and said that no, it needs to be lowered in height to be safe, and you need to light it. So they're proposing 2 steady red lights on the top and at midpoint. That was their recommendation, and you know, I think when they recommend that it needs to be lowered, it's pretty much, yeah, you need to do it for safety reasons for the landing at the nearby airfield.
Does the, probably a question for the applicant, but how much does that degrade the performance of this tower?
That certainly, apparently they felt like it was still meeting their minimal needs to signal that goes through buildings. They want to be able to go through inside buildings as well and get all the way down to boats on the river or something, but I think you'll have to ask them how much they felt that was detrimental. If it was too detrimental, they would have chosen another site.
Brian, my only concern is that I'm not quite sure what the footprint of the tower is, smack dab in the middle of 23.66 acres. Looks pretty small in the drawing.
Yes.
So my concern is that we're eating up a pretty large chunk of a limited amount of industrial land. So I'm not quite sure why we need 23.66 acres for what appears to be a footprint of maybe, and I'm just guessing here, 500-foot diameter. Does that sound?
Yeah,
reasonable?
they don't need that. In fact, it's merely stating in the report that it's on a tax lot that's 23.66 acres, but they're utilizing 2,500 square feet. It's actually a little bit more than that. It's 3,000 something with the buffer strip that goes around it. So it's a 50 by 50 area that's pretty much in the very far corner. They've just set it off the road a bit because they felt like it was best that a tower not be right on the road. But otherwise, it's in the far corner of this big tract, and it's only a leased area 50 by 50 from this property owner.
So could the remaining acreage be developed in the meantime with surround this tower?
Yeah. And so that's a trade-off that, of course, the property owner has made with them, that he feels like the additional revenue he's going to obtain from having this cell tower in the far corner isn't going to, you know, cause a problem for the rest of his 26 acres to be developed with a large manufacturing use. But he was concerned when they were also going to take a 25-foot wide easement along the south property boundary to get electrical service to a use that was in the other corner. And so this eliminated that easement and made it palatable, at least to the property owner. And so the question was, is this location more palatable to us than what staff thought was a slightly better location on the other corner near Malina Road?
Any more questions? Okay, let's hear from the proponents. State your name and address and.
My name is Skip Green, 6233 Southwest Orchid Drive in Portland, 97219. I'm a permitting agent for Clackamas 800 Radio Group, and I've got some compadres back with me. If there are questions I can't answer, that I'll be calling on. First off, I wanted to thank Brian and Laney for all the assistance they provided me throughout this process, starting with the pre-application. Like Brian mentioned, we started out with a 180-foot tower request in the opposite corner of this property. And because of the fact that I spoke with the agent, transportation agent in Clackamas County early on, Robert Hickson, and he had mentioned, I described the driveway, the location. He took a look at it. He thought everything was okay. However, about 3 weeks later, I get a call from Robert stating that that's a collector road, and there is a half-street improvement, which you can probably get by with a design modification through the county, which I did to keep it over there and have that driveway. Subsequently, though, the Canby City Electric, we were going to come straight off of a power pole on Malina. So it had been a 100-foot drop. However, Canby Electric, because this is in the city of Canby, has to serve this facility. Therefore, they were requiring this installation totally across the whole southern part of the property, which was unacceptable to the property owner, and actually to us too, because you're basically putting this whole structure and driveway across the whole property. It's not going to help anything in the future for the property development. And again, this is down in the southwest corner of the property as far as we could get and keep tower height setbacks. So that's the best we could, that's as close as we could get it. Pretty much everything Brian has gone over and the conditions of approval, we really don't have any big concerns about. The one thing I did want to mention on the landscaping, what we've done, I have done work, I'm mostly working with Clackamas 800 and WECA, Washington County Emergency Group now. I've done work with private communication companies in the past, like AT&T and so forth. And what we did a lot of times is actually have the landscape, especially when it's arborvitae, installed with basically drip bags, and they can basically kind of self-contain themselves for a long number of time. And then we have contractors or staff come in and basically water that until that arborvitae gets settled in. And once that settles in this territory, you pretty much don't have to have an irrigation system. So that's probably what we're going to be trying to do, if that's acceptable to the commission. But basically, we have no issues. Everything that Brian has covered, the conditions of approval are all reasonable, and we understand them and accept them. He did mention the ODA, Oregon Department of Aviation. I worked extensively with them to try to get this structure taller. We definitely lost service. There's no question about it. It's hard to quantify a percentage, but the goal of this was to, as Brian mentioned, to try to get indoor coverage to as much of the city as Canby as possible. And as you know, especially some of these larger, thick wall buildings, the police department and the fire department told us they've had some issues communicating from inside of those buildings. And this is going to help take care of most all of that. It also will go in through houses. So if they're in a house on an emergency situation, public responders, medics, first aid folks, they should be able to get out on their radios with that. Boating, summertime, we hear from the police and fire, lots of accidents, lots of issues, altercations, whatever, and we really tried to get that service improved upriver. We're losing a little bit of that because of that 30-foot drop. We're losing a little bit of coverage over toward the west, part of Canby. We're losing a little bit of indoor coverage that we would have gotten had we not had to drop the tower height. I worked extensively with Jeff Keynes at ODA. He's the one who does all their evaluations. His initial decision that I received was that they signed off on the 180-foot structure. About 2 weeks later, it's kind of like transportation in Clackamas County, I get a call from Jeff, and he says, I was talking with a board member of the Oregon Department of Aviation, and we were talking about this structure, and he asked if we thought about Dietz Airstrip. And I mentioned, yeah, I know where it is. I've spoken to them because we had actually had a site out in Clackamas County we were looking to permit. So I spoke with one of the folks at Dietz Air Park about that location. But this particular commissioner said, well, I think that's a tall structure to be, it's less than 2 miles to Dietz Airstrip. And that's true, it is less than 2 miles. However, we felt that a plane is not going to take off on a north-south runway and then swing over, that kind of distance to turn back around or whatever it would want to do without having sufficient elevation. Basically, he felt like that may be true, it may not be true, but basically you're going to have to lower that height. And there was nothing other than the discussions we had. It was the way it was going to be required. So we did lower it 30 feet and lit it per his requirements. He did relent as not requiring a white flashing light, which is very good because they are pretty distracting to folks. The red burnings at night, steady burnings, are not as distasteful to folks generally. So that's pretty much the story.
Okay. Any questions?
No.
Questions?
We were supposed to ask one question about the lats and the fence.
Yes. My answer to that one is, what color do you like? We're going to have that green arborvitae, but we can do a dark brown, we can do green. We really are open. That's a minor thing. It's not a big deal for us, whatever y'all want. We just can't color the barbed wire.
Whatever Brian says is fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah,
I like fluorescent orange.
What was that color?
Go Beavers.
Well, actually being a duck, I prefer the green, so we'll go with that.
Since both those guys were losers this year, especially in baseball,
I know.
we're going to stay with a different color.
Do a little camouflage there. Any other questions other than the important question of the color of the slats? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Are there any other proponents that would like to speak? Any opponents? Any neutral parties? Okay. That would mean that we're going to close the public hearing. And no rebuttal, since there was none of the others, so we'll close the public hearing. And questions for staff, or all done with that? So a decision. So I will entertain a motion to approve the site and design review conditional use permit to construct an essential public communication service facility consisting of a 150-foot self-supporting lattice tower with multi-omnidirectional antennas and microwave dishes at 202 North Walnut Street. That's DR 17-04/CUP 17-01 Clackamas 800 Radio Group, with the conditions as laid out by staff.
I make a motion to approve the site and design review DR-17-04/CUP 17-01 pursuant to the conditions of the staff report.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. You know, as part of this, I think that they should haul off. Just kidding.
You know, I've got an application I'm doing for Washington County and the city of, near Wilsonville. It's about 50% larger than that.
Good luck with for them, yeah. Okay, so these decisions are final and written versions of, so there's no more public testimony. I think I have these right here for me to sign, is that correct?
Yeah.
So I will sign those, but we do need a motion to approve the final findings of CUP 17-0-03 Fuentes. Do I have a motion for that?
Mr. Chair, I motion that we approve the CUP 17-03.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then a final findings for DR 17-04/CUP 17-01 Clackamas 800 Radio Group.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the final findings for DR 17-04/CUP 17-01 Clackamas 800 Radio Group.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So I'll sign those in a minute. Items of interest from the staff.
I really hadn't prepared anything that I thought needed to. We're just really busy. We're getting a backup of applications now. I mean, I took some time off. I've got other staff taking some time off. It's summertime. And so we're having trouble actually processing all of the applications we have in the waiting right now.
Into the mic, please.
So other than that, I don't have anything to relay.
Well, Brian, I think that vacation should be canceled, and that, you know, an extra 8 hours a day, what's that? Get the job done. Okay, well, thank you. Are we still on for our next meeting, which should be, I think?
Yes, July 10th.
Okay.
We have one or two applications, can't remember now. Two of them.
Okay. Items of interest or guidance from the Planning Commission. I know that we have one, at least.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would like to begin a conversation, and I don't know if this needs to go to an agenda item at one of our next meetings, but I believe that we should revisit and review the facade improvement program, the city's facade improvement program. It's a fantastic program that is currently available to building owners. We have quite a few empty spaces in the commercial districts, and especially the retail where my business is located. And But some of the buildings, such as the one that I'm in, I rent, and it's a full building, and so the way that it's currently set up is only the building owner can apply for the facade improvement program. And for a building owner such as mine, who has a fully leased building, it doesn't make any sense for him to do so. He doesn't need to improve his building. It's fully leased, and it's a matching program where he can get up to $25,000, but he would have to spend up to $25,000. That's not something that he would like to do. So I think that there's some parameters of that program that can be changed that can benefit a tenant as well. And I'd like to take a look at that and see kind of the idea that I have in my head is doing a non-matching grant type of thing within the facade improvement program that tenants or business owners in the community could apply for, the same way that the building owner would apply for the facade improvement program. Of course, you have to have the design and site review. You have to have the building owner sign off on it. You have to be approved for the grant, obviously, and of course, restrictions on how often the grant could be utilized. But I believe that, like the space that I'm in could use some refreshing and some updating, and we just don't have a desire from our building owner to do so. And so as a tenant of the building, I don't want to spend my own personal money upgrading his building for him. But I believe if there was something such as a grant program, part of the facade improvement program, that a tenant could apply for, I believe that would go a long ways to help beautify our city, benefit local businesses, benefit the building owner, of course, as well. And again, it's just some adjustments in the parameters of a currently existing program that, like I said, already is a great program. I think we can just take a great thing and make it better.
Is the current program being utilized?
I believe that it is, but not to its full extent. I know that there is budgeted money currently budgeted for it, and I don't know if it's going to be used. Again, like I mentioned, it would be just changing parameters of what's currently budgeted. I don't think that we need to go into trying to add extra funds to the program. I just think it would be good to see some of these places refreshed and updated. And there's people that are willing to put the work in that just don't want to finance it because we're tenants of buildings, not building owners ourselves. And I think that if we look, I don't know the percentage or whatnot, but a lot of our buildings in town are owned by people maybe out of town, and they're rented out. And so, people that aren't necessarily invested personally into the community like some of our building owners aren't as quick to spend money on updating those buildings. And so while it's a great program there, it's just not of any interest to them. So,
Brian, does that conversation need to start here, or?
It could start here with the Planning Commission. We would need to get the Economic Development Director and primarily the Main Street Manager involved, because that is their program. They're the ones that have been implementing that and had it established, and they can tell you how well it's been used, whether the full amount of money each year has been utilized or not. Because, if we've got a program, and I know it's being used, I just don't know whether they're fully utilizing all available grant money each year or not. And with, if they were fully utilizing it, then changing the parameters probably isn't going to be all that helpful to anybody, because it's already using all the money. But I don't know if that's true. I think there's probably some sitting there, and so expanding might further enable all the money that's available to be utilized.
Well, I think too that even changing the parameters, whether it is fully being utilized, still allows again, local businesses and local tenants to apply in the same way that a building owner would. It would, again, just change the parameters, making possibly less money available to a building owner. So I think that it's still
I've heard some criticisms of the program from a few people in the past as, quote, a city giveaway. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why currently the program has this matching thing for those people that feel like there should be some vested interest on a property owner's when the city's providing that incentive to fix up the property and such. And so I don't know how controversial that aspect or what you're proposing would be, since I'm not really that familiar with the program and how it's been used in the past. But I do see those on the council agenda now and then, the matches that we have.
Homework that I've done prior to tonight has told me that we need to start the conversation here before it can go any further. So I'd be willing to, if we could possibly put it on as an agenda item in the meeting or two, I'd be happy to do the homework of talking to economic development and Main Street folks and getting their take.
Well, maybe we could invite them to the next meeting.
Correct, yeah.
Put it on the agenda and invite them to the next meeting. Can we do that?
I think we have a lot to do. I think Canby is a wonderful place. Obviously, we all love it here, and that's why we're up here. We're doing what we're doing, but I think that we can do a few small things that will help improve the overall aesthetic of the city. And I think that facade improvement program and making sure that it's having its full use taken, or full. Sorry, I have allergies, and so I'm a little cloudy, so I just forgot what word I was looking for. But making sure it's taken advantage of completely. So, anyways.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I think it's a great idea. Personally, I bet, I'm back to what Brian said too, is if it's not being, if it's being fully utilized, then I think it would be hard to give a free grant versus a match. Because you're depleting those funds already, which means folks are beautifying, right? They're matching, so. But yeah, I think it should be, if it's not being used, somebody needs to research that, and if that money's available, then certainly that money going to beautify the area is worth it.
And maybe it becomes a secondary, the primary,
Sure.
The matching grant is taken first, and if there's not enough, then it becomes, then we look at the applications for non-matching grants, but I appreciate you guys let me bring that up.
Any other items of interest from our merry band here? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.